Hey everybody. So yes, I see you too, bud. I was inspired to make a new video today. Really motivated by boredom. I should just say I'm bored. Actually, I'm bored. So I'm just going to make a video so that all of my viewers, both of my viewers, don't think I'm dead or something. And I thought I'd go over how to set up a new drive since I just bought one. Yeah, you're a killer. Good job. So I bought a new drive today at the grocery store because they had one. And it's one of these little crappy Pioneer 120 gigabyte SSDs. So I don't know if that's focusing, I can't tell. But I have like 8 of these from different brands. Pioneer, SanDisk, Kingston, Crucial, I think, 120 and 240. And it's kind of nice to have multiples because I can have, Windows on one disk, Linux, Mac OS on another, and I can just swap them out from here and there. And, it's super convenient. So when I see a decent price, I'll pick them up. So anyways, that's that. I don't need any of that junk. You won't either. But let's go over setting up a new drive. So what I'd recommend, if you're going to install it directly into the computer, go ahead and do that. And if you already know what you're doing, then close this video. But if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know what you're doing, then what I would recommend is to pick up one of these little external cases. Now you can use a regular 3.5-inch one. So let me show you actually what's inside of those. So if I wanted to hook this up to power, I could use this. This came out of a Western Digital external drive. And basically you can see you've got power there. You've got a USB 3 plug here. Again, I don't know if it's focusing, but power, USB 3, and then the little power switch. And of course it comes with the cables and everything. This was out of a drive where I took the drive out of the enclosure, threw the box away, but kept the circuitry so that I can use it for external drives. This one's made for the larger desktop 3.5-inch drives though. And since they're bigger, they require more power than these small 2.5-inch ones. And that's why you've got a separate power adapter that goes with it. So if you have a larger drive, you should use a setup like this. Or if you have an external enclosure, you can use that. This will be inside of it and it'll come in a box. But for smaller SSDs and even traditional laptop hard drives, you can use one of these where you connect it with USB and then USB also powers it while it transfers the data. So what I have in here right now is a 250 gig Western Digital spinning drive, an old one, from some laptop, somebody's, I don't know, I've swapped out a million of them and I don't keep track. So this is how you pop them out, and what you'll see down here is just a little circuit board. And you'll notice, if you can see there, I don't know if you can, but that interface right there is the same exact interface as this one right here. So you could actually, well, you couldn't. I was going to say you could pop this out and plug it into a full-size hard drive, but it won't have enough power for it. But it's the same exact plug. Physically, it would work. Electrically, this won't power a full-size hard drive unless it's a very, very low power one, which I doubt. So to assemble these, you just plug them in like Legos. Make sure that the notches are correct. There's a small line here and then a large line. The larger one's for power, the smaller one's for data. And you basically pop it in sort of at an angle into one of these. These are cheap little enclosures, by the way. I think I spent something like 50 tele on it, which at the time was probably $10. You can get them for probably 10 to 20. Now there's a bunch of extra space in there that was not there on this one. And the reason is these older traditional ones are simply thicker, generally. And so what I've got here is just some folded up paper to throw in there so that the SSD is not flopping around. And then, you just reassemble. And so there's little notches here that pop into there, and that's it. So I have no idea what Pioneer formats these for out of the gate. It doesn't matter if it's Mac, Windows, whatever. If there's no format, we're going to start you off from scratch here. So other than that, basically, plug it in. Again, if it's a larger one or a powered one, you'll need power as well. But for this one, we're just plugging in USB and plugging it into a USB hub. Now, since I'm using a hub, which is a USB 2 hub, this will not have as much speed as it should. So I would recommend a speed test normally, but I'm not going to bother with one this time because it just doesn't make sense. It's not going to have enough speed, and I already know that. And let's see. I'm not hearing the ding. Ah, there we go. I just heard it, it was quiet. So there's a little red light on there, it's plugged in. So to start this out, let's have a look in this PC and see if it shows up. This is my normal Windows PC, normal Windows disk, and it should show up right here. You might have a CD drive here, but then you would have another one, and I don't see it. But it's definitely plugged in, it's definitely on and working. So it might not be formatted at all yet. So there's two ways to do this. There's one way built into Windows, I'll show you that first. To get there, you'll right-click My PC and come down here to Manage. Now you've got to be an administrator to do this, so I'm assuming that you're using an administrator account. And once you're here, you'll come down to Disk Management. So you've got, for instance, Device Manager, which will show a whole bunch of stuff, and actually, we can see this right here is the USB device that I just plugged in, so I know it's seen, I know it's showing up. But let's go to Disk Management. So now you see it says you must initialize a disk before Logical Disk Manager can access it, and it asks you which one, and it shows Disk 2. So this one was not formatted whatsoever, and doesn't have a partition table on it at all. So now if you just plug this in, or even if you plugged it in internally, you might say, well, where the hell is my drive? Come here, look at this. Now, you can see you've got two options. Master Boot Record, MBR, is the older traditional one. GPT, which stands for GUID Partition Table, GUID, which I forget what the G stands for, but UID is Unique Identifier Partition Table. And basically, those two tables, those two different options, are the way that it creates an index of what your files are and where they're stored. So, if you're running anything before Windows 10, you'll probably want to use and may even have to use MBR. If you're using Apple, you'll probably want to use GPT. I'm going to use MBR because I may well wipe this and change it at some point in the future anyways. This is just for the video, really. GPT is the newer one. It's got some advantages, but frankly, you're not going to notice the difference if this is just going to be used as like an external drive or for storage. It won't matter. So I'm going with MBR, and we'll click OK. So this is what Windows calls initializing, I guess. But basically what you're doing is you're telling it how to write the index of the drive. But now you can see it shows unallocated and 111.55 gigabytes. Now if you've ever wondered why a 120 gigabyte drive shows up as 111, it's the difference between gigabytes and gibibytes. So it is, and I forget which is which. Basically, one of them is based on the powers of 10, and I think that's gigabytes, and so it shows 120. But 111.55 is based on powers of 2, showing gibibytes, which you don't hear about often. The difference is a gigabyte is 1,000, and a gibibyte is 1,024 megabytes or mebibytes. And so when you consider that there's that 24 extra mebibytes per gigabyte, if I'm not mistaken, what you end up with is a capacity lower than 120 in actuality. But manufacturers want to show you 120 because it looks bigger. And that's that. It's a marketing thing. So, you know, it makes more sense to call it a 111 gigabyte drive. But that would be base 10, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas with base 2, which is a little more confusing, it drops down. Or wait, no. 111 is base 2. That would make more sense to call it that. But 120 is larger, so they go with that. So at any rate, now all you got to do is right-click it, and you can do New Simple Volume. Click Next here. If you want to put different partitions in here, then you probably know what you're doing. Close the video. If not, I would say use the entire thing, the entire partition. Again, unless you know what you're doing or unless you want to reserve something for later. So let's hit Next. You're assigning a drive letter. Now this can change, and you may have other drives that you have already assigned a drive letter to that you've already used before. Don't worry about that. Basically, if your initial drive is probably going to be C, you might have a D drive as well when you open up My Computer. If you have externals that you plug in and out, they just go by whatever one was plugged in first. So if you've got D in there and then you plug in another one, it'll be E. If you want that one to be D, unplug them both, plug in E first, and it'll show up as D. Now you can actually manually change the drive letters as well. But that's for another time. So let's just go with this. Click Next. Now it's asking about formatting. You want to format this volume, and you have two options, exFAT and NTFS. Now exFAT is supposed to be a little more universal. So for instance, there's now an exFAT driver for Linux and so forth. FAT stands for File Allocation Table, and this is just kind of a newer version of the old FAT32, FAT16, and so on. NTFS, the NT in Windows stuff, stands for New Technology. So it's the New Technology file system. And it's got some other things like journaling that help to keep the data safe. I'm going to go with NTFS because I know my Linux machines can read it without a problem. I know my Mac machines can read it without a problem. Basically, I have no issue with that, and frankly, I'm going to be using it more often on Windows anyways. So NTFS is probably the way you should go. FAT file systems, because they don't have journaling, and I believe this still applies to exFAT, even though it's fairly new, without journaling, it can suffer from data loss and bit rot and things like that. To my understanding, a bit more than NTFS. You'll probably never notice the difference. You can really choose either, but I'm going with NTFS. Now, I don't want to give it a name. I'm going to just delete this. As for the allocation unit size, you can choose different block sizes. I'm going to go with the default, which I think might be 4 kilobytes, but I don't remember. That's one of those weird things that I just don't even need to know, and you probably aren't going to need to know either. So leave it at default. And then I'm going to perform a quick format. The difference between a quick format and a not quick format is a standard format, I guess. We'll go through every single block in there and we'll zero it out. Whereas a quick format, what it does is it zeroes out that MBR or GPT table. So with a quick format, the data is still there, but you've told that table to wipe itself. So it doesn't know where to find any of the data and show it. So it shows it as not being there. This is a brand new one, so I know there's no data anyways, and I don't really care. But if you wanted to be more secure, you could uncheck that, and it's a bit secure. Now, if you really wanted to be secure, CCleaner actually has a secure file deletion option. If you go into, I think it's here in Tools and Drive Wiper, yeah. And what you can do is overwrite it with multiple passes. And you can choose to wipe the entire drive or the free space only, and you can choose which drive. And what that will do is it will write zeros to every block. And then it will write zeros again and again if you tell it to do more than one pass. Doing that takes away any possible trace, because sometimes even when you do a single pass overwrite, some of that data is still there. It's still sort of hanging on. So that's kind of another thing, a more security-minded thing. We're just going to do a quick format, and I'm not going to do enable file and folder compression. If you need to do that, then you know what you're doing. I'm going to skip over it. Do next. Do finish. Since it's an SSD, it'll be quick. Should be. Hey, I couldn't even light my cigarette. So I'll make you all wait for me while I do that. So now you can see it shows up as D with that 112-ish gigabyte, I think. I always confuse the two, sorry. It's the technical things that you can look up if you want to know more about. It shows NTFS and it shows healthy with one partition. So let's look in this PC. There it is, totally free, nothing on it. And it's about that simple. Now, let me show you what happens if we make multiple partitions. So I'm going to do format again. Actually, no, cancel. I'm going to do delete volume. Yes. Now, new simple volume, next. And let's make this, I don't know, what is approximately half of that? Let's say like 58000. I think that's around 60 gigs-ish. We'll assign it to D, next. Get rid of this, let's call it apps. Finish. You see it's got one partition that's D around 60 gigs, a little less. Now I can take this other unallocated space, new simple volume, next, next. We'll call it E this time, and I can say games, next, finish. Come on, here we are. Now I've got two partitions, and when I open up my PC, you'll see them both. But of course they're smaller. Now I don't actually need two partitions, so I'm going to go in there and I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to do yes. Now here's a nice thing that you can do with Windows. I can take this and extend the volume. So now let's see here. I've selected this disk. Select the amount of space that you want to extend. I'm selecting the maximum. You can choose something smaller if you want. I'm going to do next and finish. And you see it's just expanded and taken up the whole disk drive. Now I've actually done this as well, where you can do shrink volume. And then you can choose how much you want to shrink it by. I'm not going to do that right now, but it's basically the same thing in opposite. And you can see here though, it says you cannot shrink a volume beyond the point where any unmovable files are located. And then yada yada. What that means is, let's say you've got a drive that's a 240 gig drive, or a 250 gig drive, like this one. But let's say it's only got 60 gigs worth of stuff on it, and you want to move to a faster SSD. First thing you would do is shrink it down to say 100 gigabytes, and that wouldn't change any of the data that's on there because there's less than that in there. And it will automatically move files if it needs to. And then you can clone it, which again is sort of for another thing. Now there is another way to do all of this. And I'll show you that program, which is really nice and free. This one's called EaseUs. Kind of like Jesus, but totally different. So EaseUs.com, and you can download it from here. Now I've already got it open. This is saying, since I've plugged in this disk and unplugged it, the information has changed. I hadn't plugged it in before I opened this up. So let's do yes, and let's refresh it. So this is the new disk guide, and it can help you by pointing you towards changing the sizes automatically to make them even sizes and so on if you want a bunch of different partitions. I don't want any of that. We can change from MBR to GPT. I'm just going to do exit. This is the basic thing that you'll see. Now, what's neat is I can do things like clone, I can delete all. Let's do delete all. Pops up there, and now you can do execute. There we go. Apply. So this is another tool that can be used that's got some extra features and a little more functionality than the basic built-in Windows one. I'm going to close that out. You can right-click and convert to GPT. You can, which I didn't mean to do. All right, that's fine. We'll do that anyways. And then I'll show you, for just backing up files and stuff, it's the same. It doesn't make a difference to you, as long as you're using a fairly new computer. But you see here, it's unallocated and unused for the file system. So if I right-click here, I can do create, and then I can create the partition this way. So what's nice about this is this little graphical thing where I can just choose, I can actually choose the starting point of the partition. If for some reason I want to put it towards the end, I can do that. So like for instance, if I want to create a partition in the end that is the D drive, and I know the size that I want to use for that exactly first. Maybe I want it right at 66.09 for some reason. And then later I can add another one right here. So at any rate, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use the whole thing. So then, to create the partition in here to make it actually usable, because right now, there's nothing there. It's not usable because it's not formatted. So, this will format it, okay? Pops up here. Now you've got to do this, okay, apply. There it is, and it'll show up in here. Now you have to be careful with both of these programs, and I'll show you why. This right here, this is my Linux partition. It doesn't show up because I don't have a letter for it, but it's in there. This is actually 2 separate drives that are in RAID. Whole other thing, not going to get into it. But if I were to accidentally right-click this and do delete all, or if I were to convert it or something like that, or do rebuild MBR, I'm going to have data loss. I'm going to mess stuff up. You must make sure that you're selecting the correct disks. Okay. Let's convert this back to MBR real quick, just because. There we go. Updating info, complete, finish. And now again, it's using the master boot record file index rather than the GPT style. It still shows up on 111 gigabytes. And that's about it. I really like this particular program here because, for instance, it's showing this as ext4, whereas, and that's a common Linux file system. Whereas if I look in Windows Disk Management, it simply says healthy primary partition. And then when you look up here, it doesn't give the file system because it doesn't recognize ext4. This other one does. I think this EaseUs will also recognize Apple's APFS and what's the other one that they use? Something with a J. Yeah, I forget. Apple has APFS and I think HPF or something like that. But journaled and whatever. So this is a nice free program that you can get and use. The annoying thing is it'll pop up now and then and say update, but it's still free. There's a bunch of other stuff you can do in here, but that right there is the basics to setting up a drive in one of 2 ways. If it's just a really simple thing where you just want one big partition to store a bunch of photos and junk and whatever, use the Windows thing. It's a little bit easier, and you don't need to download anything. But if you want to do separate partitions for whatever reason, or if you want those other options, EaseUs Partition Master. EaseUs Partition Master is a really nice free app that you can use for it. And yeah, that's about it. I'm actually going to take this out. I'll probably end up using it in a laptop. I've got some little cartridges that take a hard drive. You can pop it into a laptop, and I'll probably install Linux on it of one form or another and use it in my old Dell laptop. But for now, this is it. So yeah, hopefully that helps some people who don't know what to do with a new drive, especially if it doesn't show up. All right, enjoy.